Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm one of your hosts. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Patsy Freeman. Patsy, welcome to you.
Thank you. Glad to be here today.
Good to see you. And welcome to our other co-host and partner in crime, friend of many years, Leb Tannenbaum. Leb, I'm going to welcome you at the same time I'm tossing the baton to you to introduce our guest for today's show.
All right. And thank you, Patrick and Patsy. So I get the honor of introducing Komal Doshi. And this gives you a little insight into how great it's going to be to spend some time with Komal. I asked her, give me a few bullet points on how to best introduce you. And I got the most great long paragraph. So I am literally going to read it to make sure we cover all the bases. So Komal has been working for a decade at the intersection of mobility, technology, and cities. She's a systems thinker who has advanced mobility innovation in industry, cities, and academia. Her career has ranged from bringing tools and methodologies to organizations and cities around the globe to working deeply on strategy, policy, and programs to strengthen the Ann Arbor, Michigan region's mobility innovation ecosystem. That's a mouthful right there. I like it. She is currently the director of mobility programs at Ann Arbor Spark in Michigan. Her typical day involves, this was mind-blowing for me, Komal. Her typical day involves working with mobility tech startups that range from autonomous bots to drones to safety apps, supporting the automotive industry, yay, Detroit, on strategic partnerships and working with the public sector to deploy technology to benefit the community. She grew up in New Delhi, India, where she got her bachelor's in architecture. Well, that we got to try to connect the dots on that architecture. Okay. And she came to the U.S. for her master's in urban design at the University of Michigan and made Ann Arbor, Michigan, her home. Welcome, Komal Doshi.
Thank you so much. It was weird hearing about you, but I'm really excited to be here.
So I'm imagining that some of our listeners are really not quite clear about what mobility is, maybe why it's important to their organization, what's in that conversation, its relationship to transportation or possibly accessibility, and how why is it relevant to a frustrated CEO or just leaders all over the nation who are diversifying their workforce?
Yeah, as I got into mobility because I was very passionate about access. I saw that access, like improving your life, access to anything, had a component of movement. It had a component of gaining access to education. I need to access healthcare. I need to access food. It's part of my daily life is accessing things to enrich myself, and I need that. But to do that, my or anyone's thinking is often that it is done through transportation, movement, mobility. And transportation planners will tell you that mobility is all about thoroughfare for them. How many cars did we move down the road? And that's what, what's the speed? What's the thoroughfare look like? But as my former mentor, Susan Zielinski, who I worked with for 5 years at the University of Michigan, taught me, and I follow that model still, that it is more than just about the thoroughfare. It is about improving the movement of people, movement of goods, and it's also moving less. It's like if we can get things without moving, that's amazing. And that means good urban design, it means good architecture, it means better placement of things, but it also means telehealth and telemedicine. So it's a lot of different things. It's about thinking about how you are improving access for people and goods.
Wow. access and goods. That's really that's a big field. That's that's an important piece. So I don't know a whole lot about mobility, and I've been to Ann Arbor a few times. Maybe it would be good to begin, but to take it kind of local, so we can kind of get a feel for some of the things that were in your introduction. You know, innovation, working with an automobile industry, working with startups. I'm sure there's a lot of really cool startup activity. You know, we're hearing about autonomous driving vehicles, and take us away.
Yeah, it's a very interesting field. When I got into the field of mobility a decade ago, the conversation, at least in India, where I was, it was a lot about infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
and it was about operations. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you're either thinking about the roads and the bridges and the metro and the train, or you're thinking of how it's going to be. You know, what's the frequency it's running, how many riders. And I was drawn to the technology. You know, could we have new business models? Could we think of new ways of moving things, moving people? And yes, it would still involve infrastructure. It would still involve some degree of operations, but it could allow you to leapfrog some of them. Maybe you didn't have to build some of these things. Maybe there was a different way. Um, and so I am very fortunate that for a decade, this is all I've done. I've worked in mobility innovation, and it is amazing to work in this field that is evolving at such a rapid pace. So, you know, Leb, you mentioned some of the things I see every day, but I am seeing everything from autonomous car, autonomous bots. I'm seeing the drones. I'm seeing battery technology, charging stations, solar charging. It is a plethora. You know, we think systems. um, it's not just about physically connecting things, it's also digital. So, you know, our phone is
Mm-hmm.
now our gateway to so many things. The reason Uber and Lyft became popular is not because of what they were doing. Yes, they did include or improve the amount of vehicles at your disposal by making anybody a driver for them, as opposed to a fixed asset structure like a taxi cab company. But a big part of their success is the fact that they have the technology that makes them the connector. It brings it to you so fast and you can see it, right? So the technology piece of it is inherently a big piece of this. And so so I really enjoy that. But so I help and coach a lot of these companies that come up with new ideas, how to help them grow,
Mm.
how to help them think of their business model, think of their customer, what is their value proposition, whose need are you solving, and how will you make that sale. But then I also get to work with the big industry. I get to work with the public sector on deployment of technology, which makes my day extremely fun. Every day is different. I get to do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Come on, how has the pandemic, right, the experience of the last 2 years, impacted um, the direction of mobility, or the innovation of mobility? I'm thinking about, from a business standpoint, employees working more remotely, working from home. I'm thinking about serving customers remotely. In some ways, the pandemic has allowed us to reach customers all over the world. Versus, you know, think about geography differently, and then about the movement of products and services, the movement of goods. So, each of those, or any of those, how has the pandemic impacted or changed the trajectory of mobility over the last couple of years?
Yeah, and it's a perfect example of moving less, right? We've kind of replaced our trips with technology, and that is amazing. But if you look at on the goods movement side, that has been an increase. We're getting stuff delivered to us all the time. And so there is a lot of goods movement that is happening, and a lot that is being disrupted because of supply chain issues.
Right.
That I think has created a lot of difficulties for the industry and for people in general. So it is, I think, it has really focused on some of the problems and some of the opportunities that we have. And so our ability to work remotely, that's the opportunity that we were all able to embrace. And there was technology to support that. But it has also highlighted for us some of the gaps that exist in our ecosystem, where communities don't have digital access, where there are equity barriers, that there are issues in supply chain that we were not able to plan for when we were thinking of systems. And I think that is, again, where innovation comes in. Innovation thrives in constraints. Innovation thrives in solving difficult problems. So I think there's a lot of, we'll see a lot of new things. We've already seen a lot of new things come up. And we'll keep seeing more innovative solutions coming to solve these really complex problems.
So I'm curious, you mentioned the traditional way of thinking that many transportation planners have had, and you mentioned the traditional way of thinking in India around infrastructure and bridges, and yet you are working with startups that are very non-traditional thinkers. And you've mentioned systems thinking. I'm wondering how you start to bridge that gap into the traditional thinking. You could say, many of the car makers are traditional thinking, even though they have a startup. So and CEOs are bumping up against this all the time. How have you found it effective through a systems thinking lens, or just in how you're dealing with the traditional thinkers, to start to move people in that more open-minded?
That's a very hard problem, and I bump into it all the time. It's, my startups, most of them are either selling to transit and city infrastructure people or to the automotive. Very rarely are they selling to the consumer directly. And so, both of those are slow sales cycle, very difficult to get into, and the incumbent problem of people not wanting change. And I think this is what I think leadership, finding organizations where there are leadership that encourage innovation, that think of innovation as part of their strategic framework, that it's not an afterthought. It is that the organization knows this is what we want to achieve, and we want to encourage anyone and everyone in the organization to think innovatively. And then it starts becoming part of the culture of the organization to innovate, and for them to find partners outside of the organization, where I come in as that bridge connecting people to that innovation. But when that doesn't exist, my approach is trying to better understand their problem. So I start putting on my customer discovery hat, and I'm like, okay, so tell me what keeps you up at night. What are the issues you're facing? And then trying to see who can solve that problem for them. It could be sometimes an efficiency problem. It could be an operational problem. It could be, sanitization problem. The people are getting sick. They need sanitization technology. And then finding that connection and solution for them, and placing it more not as, see, this is cool, but like, I thought about your problem, and I think this can solve it for you. It still might not work, but at least then the frame of reference for them is that my situation will improve because of this, and they gave me the problem. I did not bring them something new that is their headache that they have to somehow incorporate within their.
What I love about what you're saying is so often CEOs even don't fully understand their need. They think they know what they need, But until you actually do what you're talking about, which is help them discover what's really, really at the heart of their need, then they're often solving for the wrong thing. So I love the space of inquiry that you're creating, curiosity, without having a product you're trying to sell them. That's really helpful.
So if we build on it, two things are coming up for me. One is going back to when Patrick, asked a question about the pandemic. And, Patrick and Patsy and myself as consultants faced old thinking at times. And some of it was around, if I can't see you, I don't trust you. And therefore, you must do, all these fear-based kinds of things to make people feel like they were going to remain productive as an organization. And, so you walk in to this, this kind of preset mindset. And, I'm just curious because you are kind of on the front lines. Sometimes, we're on the front lines in certain areas around, and it might be opening up a thought about the culture, or some measures that help people feel more comfortable that people can be very productive working remotely, or maybe even more productive than they were before, which is kind of a mind blower because what we hear about is, oh yeah, but the innovation. So let's tie it back to innovation. Innovation is going to slow down, or it's not going to happen because we're not together. We're not at the water cooler. We're not rubbing shoulders in the same way. How do you deal with that when you've got a startup kind of body, and then you go to automotive, an industry mindset, and somewhere in there, identifying the need or the problem that maybe they don't even understand. And I'll get there. I'm almost done. The last piece is it's easier. I've worked in transportation as a consultant. It's easier to fund infrastructure and operational things than it is to determine the value and how much money to fund and something that is new.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you've got to deal with funding. So I said a lot, but if you can, kind of educate us some, because you're working front line with some really unique differences.
Yeah, and well, I'll start with what I do, and then I can tackle what organizations should do. So I try to keep the mindset of constantly iterating and constantly taking feedback and improving the hypothesis. And it's extremely frustrating sometimes, but I think that's what all good entrepreneurs will do. I think all good leaders do as well, is being able to constantly take the feedback that you get and keep pivoting and adjusting to still achieve the goal that you set out to achieve. So, for example, we had this project that we were all set to launch. It was an autonomous shuttle pilot in downtown Ann Arbor, 5 shuttles that would be on demand that people could call, including one that was ADA accessible. And it would have been first for our region, and the pandemic hit, and we lost 2 of our funders, went off the table because we're like, we don't know about our funding situation anymore. We also lost, we had our transit partner engaged as well, and we lost them off the table as well because they were really headlong prioritizing their operations. So at that point, it's that situation, you need an X amount of funding to make this happen.
Mm-hmm.
So first it was like, it's not safe. Nobody wants to get in a shared vehicle. Okay, we pushed, but we still need to fundraise. We need to fill the gap that's been created. And that's, again, we went back to the drawing board and we were like, who cares about this problem? Let's start thinking like that. And we all came up with different ideas, and we added 2 new funders that were never even considered remotely for the project. One was a real estate developer that was new and was wanting to encourage car-free lifestyle. and they wanted their property to be a stop and wanted the ability for people to utilize a different mode of transportation to get around to the downtown. And the other was another startup that had pedestrian safety technology that wanted a platform to deploy and collect data and prove. But they were a startup, they themselves didn't have enough money, would have been my initial thought. But the value add for them was that they could collect data and they could show partnership with an important known entity that was very beneficial for them. And so I think the constant ability to take a failure, digest it, pivot, and go for, what next can we do, and keep asking questions. And, it's like these questions led us to these two partners. It was like, who would care that we have autonomous shuttles in our downtown? Who cares about this? Like, whose problem are we solving? And there were these two people. And they actually turned out to be probably the most relevant partners at the table, because it truly solved the need for them. So I think for any organization, that's, I think, any crisis, pandemic, I see it as a crisis, is that it's unfortunate that a lot of organizations, when the pandemic hit, pivoted to what's the basic minimum we need to do to keep the organization running, which I think is so unfortunate, because I understand the mindset, but I think that's where they lose out. What it should be, and some organizations did a great job at that, which is use that as an opportunity to reframe the goals and say, how can we achieve that differently, more effectively? And so, we saw some really cool things that organizations did, in transit agencies themselves. Some of them were able to see that it's not about their highest performing routes, but it is about people who need the most access, that can't do their jobs digitally, that's the routes they need to prioritize when they have less bus drivers, that they continue to meet the need more than necessarily running the routes through urban centers, which were high in demand when people were coming into offices, but now were low performing because those people were working from home. People put sanitization technology. Some people tried digital ticketing. I think it's the goals being they wanted to keep the driver safe. They wanted the people to feel safe coming in, but they were not touching many things. So again, I think that frame is very helpful in any crisis.
Wow. So sometimes innovation is seen, and some companies have really successfully disrupted an industry, right? And it creates animosity and headwinds. Patrick, remember when we were in that large executive networking group, and the owner of of a cab company, they got caught. They were, with the technology and the speed with which people started using Uber at first, and then, other providers came along as well. How do you, have you seen that? Have you seen some of the resistance tied to negativity because some of this is disruptive?
Definitely. See, if you're taking away somebody's job, there is going to be resistance. But my recommendations to organizations that are facing disruption is often, while think of what you haven't done that you could do to beat that disruption or join the disruption, because clearly what you're doing is not working. Otherwise they would not have been able to disrupt the market. So there were some cab companies that were able to utilize the model that Uber and Lyft and others had to develop their own connected systems, right? And they fared better because at least they went ahead with the times, and they still had, I think, something novel to them, that you knew and trusted the driver and the asset that's going to come pick you up. It's not going to be a different one. You can rely on the quality. You can rely on the fact that it'll be a trained driver. And there is a market for that people would care about that. But they needed to move ahead in times, that they were connected, that they provided technology access, that I don't have to call 24 hours before to get a cab to the airport, that I can make that choice, that I want that off the fly if I'm stuck somewhere. And so I think moving with the times is something you have to kind of face the disruption and see, can you do the same thing? And maybe you can't. Not everybody can, but a lot of people can. They just choose not to.
So we think about one of the things we aspire to do with this show is to address the issues that keep CEOs awake at night. And disrupting my business is clearly, or disruptions to my business is clearly something that keeps me awake at night. That's we hear that from a lot of CEOs. They're constantly worried about, getting caught, not paying attention to the trends, and yet on the flip side of that, there's so much noise out there. There's so much technology and innovation that is it never sees the light of day, or never makes it beyond a crazy idea on a whiteboard. You're involved with startups. What guidance can you give a CEO for how to weed through? First of all, where should they be? And maybe this is an unanswerable question because there's so much out there. But where should a CEO be paying attention? Where should they be putting their attention, and how do they weed through everything that's out there to figure out narrow it down to what really do I need to be paying attention to try to anticipate the disruptions?
That is a hard one. Well, I would say that in an organization, there are many people doing many different things. I will go back to encouraging every person in your organization, people who are doing it daily as a technology, to people who are doing business and strategy, to maybe who are doing marketing communication. Everyone should feel empowered enough to innovate and contribute to the strategic thinking of the organization. Because we're all watching for this, right? It's not only the CEO's job, or it shouldn't be the CEO's job alone to figure out what that disruption is. And if the CEO is able to keep the doors open to everyone who's working on the shop floor, or to the person who's actually working on strategy, to come to them with what they are seeing or why they think that is important. I think it's an important metrics of feedback loop, because we're all seeing different things and we might find value in very different things. Now, how to cut the noise, that's very hard, because if you're going to take these many inputs, there will be some that will be noise. And I think I think that's where the CEO's skill at rifting the noise, like they need to develop the skill of being able to parse, create good lines of communication, and be able to take what is essential and non-essential and be able to put it into buckets. But to keep the eyes open and watch for disruption, watch for opportunities to innovate, that onus should be on every member of the organization.
But I love that. And in my experience, if you're an individual contributor and you're used to just keeping your head down, strategy or looking outside is almost counterintuitive. To so it goes back to, I think, your idea or your thoughts around creating a culture of innovation. It's that creating a culture of being everybody has a lens into their own world. And how have you promoted or supported CEOs or people in senior positions to actually develop that feedback loop?
think, again, it's when I work with my startups, it is a little bit easier because a lot of them are starting something new and bright. They're very possessive about their child, their technology, but they're not big enough and they haven't built those structures
Right.
that it is a lot more easier to influence culture. Um, it's
Mhm.
much harder what you guys do, which is change culture at big organizations where things are already entrenched and um, people see things a certain way, are used to doing things a certain way, and every change seems like you're rocking the boat. Um, Leb knows this about me. I'm a very curious person. I like asking questions, and it sometimes people go on the defensive because again, I like asking questions. I will phrase that with, I will put that note there. I do love asking questions, but I'm also extremely respectful of the fact that like everyone's coming with, my questions are about why and the how, but they aren't about why did you do this? It's more about, you know, how are you doing things or what is the problem we're trying to solve, right? So I try very hard to be respectful of the institutional knowledge they have about, you know, what there are reasons why they've been doing things a certain way, and some of those might not be apparent. So I try to be mindful of that when I ask, but sometimes my curiosity gets the better of me, and some people might find it that I'm coming from a place of she's going to change everything that we do. And that's not the goal, right? Which is why I try to find like-minded spirits, leaders who want to see change happen, engage them, and try to work on projects. And a lot of times, those are the people who are tasked with this strange task of innovation. You know, a lot of organizations have an innovation lead. You know, and
Mhm.
we are these strange people who do so many different, wear so many different hats, can juggle so many different ideas in their heads at the same time. um, uh, and I don't think, some people think innovation people are the ones that you know can make beautiful reports and just do that. No, we're change agents. We want to see action. It's not just about writing papers, it's about changing the world. And so I try to find people like that, and then it's much easier. It's much easier to work with them.
Do you find, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this, but um, you're, let's go to DEI. Let's go to some of the diversity and equity and inclusion, right? So you come at, right now, it's one of the ways I'm holding is we're talking about diversity of ideas that might lead to innovations,
Mhm.
right? You're a curious person and you're coming in, perhaps asking the why with good intent, right? But you're very, I know this, you're a very authentic person. You're a woman, you're from India. You know, what are the unique things that you have to deal with in order to feel like I'm being heard, or I really earned my seat at the table, or because that whole area to me seems also ripe with like access and accessibility and innovation, some of the other things we're talking about outside of transportation. What's it like to be Komal?
Yeah, when I started working in this field, it would be very strange for me. I start when I got into mobility. Um, I was reporting to a woman leader, but she and I would often be the only women in the room. Automotive is highly male dominated, or at least was. It's changing quite a bit. Um, it would be a lot of the case with when we even met with our public sector partners. Most of the transportation planners, city heads, even transit agency heads would all often be men in the room. Um, and as somebody who was starting out, it was extremely difficult for me to raise my point of view. One, I was young, so I hadn't formulated enough about the industry, the space. I always felt like they knew more because everyone was much older than me. They are more assertive than me, and it felt difficult to raise a point of view. I remember clearly there was this one time we were in this giant boardroom. We were all sitting around the table, and I was not even on the table. I was in the back seat. You know how you have these seats along the wall. I was one of the people.
I know that one.
And there was a question, and I felt, strongly the need to comment, and I raised my hand and I gave an idea, and everyone looked at me, and it was almost as if they couldn't even see me. So it went, there was no response, there was no acknowledgement of an idea being shared. It was like there was a noise. We saw what it is, and now we're back to our discussion. Well, 5 minutes later, somebody else raised the same point I had raised, and everybody in the room nodded, and they were like, "That's a very good point. That's a very good point."
Ooh.
Well, credits to Sue, who I used to report to. She quickly pointed that out. That she was like, "I am so glad that you agree with the point Komal made, because I think it's a very important one that we need to acknowledge." Now, the thing is, she did not call him out for his mistake, because that would have created confrontation, which she wanted to avoid. She didn't want it to seem like we're two women against them. But she did acknowledge that the idea actually came from me, not from him,
Good.
which made me feel
Yep.
heard. It made me feel like my point of view mattered, and that I needed to do more of that. And she would have my back if people didn't hear me, right? That's when I learned like what a true leader needs to do for inclusion. It's not just having me in the room is enough. It's making sure I get heard, making sure I feel empowered enough to say and know that it's going to add value. It's going to mean something.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story. It's very illustrative.
Komal, we're in the middle of, even as we're taping, we're in the middle of the hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, and what I've heard and read is that watching those hearings has raised a lot of similar feelings and experiences for a lot of women and people of color. One of the questions that I thought was it was moving to watch. Judge Brown was asked, what advice would you have for a young person coming up so that she or they can be where you are someday? So as such a, like I said, the answer was moving, and I'll let the listener Google that themselves. But for you, here you are, and you just talked a couple of minutes ago about needing to find your voice. What advice would you have for a young woman, a person of color in that same place who's trying to find her voice? What advice would you have for them today?
Yeah, I appreciate that like the world has moved to a place where people are more mindful of DEI. We want to see more diversity. We want to see more equity. And I really love that that's happening. But I think for a lot of people of color, minorities, and I've had this conversation with colleagues, it's the situation where you start questioning, are you at the table because of your color or because of your gender? Are you there because you are contributing something meaningful? Because there is a lot of tokenism to this. People want you there because, well, it was an all-white male panel. We need to put in a woman there, otherwise we look bad. They've not put in any thought in, what is the topic? Can I speak to that topic? Is that relevant, having me there? And that can be very frustrating for somebody young and old. I still sometimes get angered when I'm asked to speak on topics. Clearly, they know is not my area of expertise, right? So it can be really demotivating, and people don't realize that, because when you start questioning your own self-worth because of something as small as you were asked to sit on a panel, I think that's a very difficult thing for someone to face. And so somebody asked me that. She was like, I think they're only inviting me because, they couldn't find another person of color. And I don't want to do it. Like, I don't want to be the token Black person in the room or token brown person in the room. And over time, I have come to bring myself as well as impart this advice to others is it is not right that they're inviting you without knowing. That is definitely not done, but it is an opportunity. They are inviting you, and as a person who represents the minorities, it is our job to go there and give it our best. Be the most badass, rock hard, kickstart person, like awesome person, and really do a good job. Because then I'm hoping that next time they will invite us for us, not because they needed a brown, Black, Asian, American, whatever. It's not who we are by any one thing that should matter. It should matter that we have a diverse perspective. We are contributing something far more to the conversation, and they know that we are capable of doing that. So that's my hope. And I now take almost any panel opportunity.
Good for you.
It's okay. I'm going to go and do my best.
Awesome.
So you very eloquently talked about what it's like from your position, stepping up. There's so much these days about, especially the diversity and equity pieces of DEI. For a lot of our work is really about inclusion. And, I once had a client that asked me to fix the engineers, and I'm like, what's wrong with them? It's like but they didn't know how to integrate them into the organization. If you were to talk to a CEO that's frustrated on the topic of DEI, what advice or what would you say to them about the inclusion part? How can they start to be more inclusive?
Yeah, I think there is no one thing that brings about diversity or inclusion, but it is about, again, the culture, creating a system where you're mindful of why are you doing this? You're not doing this to show people that you have women in leadership role or that you have done this. No, you're doing this because you think they are smart, because you're thinking they're bringing a perspective that is lacking. That why needs to be clear. If it's not clear in your head, in every person in your organization's head, then that's a problem.
That's great.
Because you're not on the same page. And so, even in the earlier example, I said, having those people in the room is not enough. It is that they have to feel empowered to talk. They have to feel like they're being heard. And that's where, again, it comes down to the leadership and the culture. How are we building that? How are we creating a organization, a community where it's offering a lot of opportunities? I get asked, when we're hiring, it's very common. It's how many diverse candidates did we get? And again, like I know it comes from a place of inquiry, but it's not based on the right sentiment. The question needs to be, how many diverse avenues did we explore, be it the way we posted the job, the way we reached out to educational institutions that work in minorities, that to find candidates that are equally good that bring diverse perspective to the organization that will make this job, this role, feel more fulfilled. That again, it's not about us showing that we have a diverse looking staff. We're not taking the United Colors of Benetton photograph. That's not the goal that we're going to show. We're all a different shade. The goal is to get, again, those diverse perspectives so that we continue to innovate, we continue to be a better organization. And like Patrick, you were saying, that we are not dumbfounded when disruption hits us.
That's great.
I love that.
So I'm listening to you, and you are authentic. You're right. You're really present. You're strong. We've talked about this before, right? You're curious, and you start adding these attributes up, and there's a certain challenge in that. But at the same time, and you and I had talked about this before, so I'm referencing this. How do you not undersell yourself? At the same time, you're kind of teetering on they're like, wait a minute, she's asking questions nobody else is asking her, or whatever, that might, and however people perceive that. What do you have to say to the up and coming leaders who feel, someone like, I better tone it down, or I need to compromise myself in some way, undersell?
Well, this is something you and I struggle with this. I don't think I've done a good job of doing this. I like to be frank. When I try to build a connection with anybody, I try to be, like I said, the most authentic version of myself. And it can be a detriment because I try to be very clear. This is what I can do. This is what I like to do. This is what I don't want to do. I don't like to do. This is what I think could be a problem. What do we think about this? And it can make some people really uncomfortable. And to some people, it seems underselling myself because, well, you clearly can do that. Why are you saying you can only do 50% of that? And I'm like, because maybe I hold very high standards. I don't know, but I clearly don't think I can do all 100% of it. But, a lot of people say this, that, when you see a job position posted, if you can do 50% of it, you should apply. Well, I'm clearly not that person. And I think most women are not, because, we try to check boxes and we think, can we do it all? And nobody can do it all. And I think that's a struggle for people. It's a struggle for me when I explain what I do. Like I said, I'm the first to admit I can juggle all these multiple hats, and I love seeing systems, and I love doing that. But I also know what I'm not good at. And I think now this is my personal view. I think a lot of people in this world don't think like this, which is the problem in my view. But I really think that as a leader, knowing what you're good at and what you're not good at or don't enjoy is a real strength, because then you can hire those people to do those things who love those things, right? Why do we have to claim to be good at everything? No, it's not necessary. And if me and my partner, if you're getting into a partnership project, if me and my next employer or employee can have that honest conversation about, this is where we need to go, what can you do to achieve that goal? Instead of us looking at, this is my job description, tell me, out of the 5, how many can you tick mark? I think it's a much more honest conversation. Same for partnerships, right? That's what when I'm in the room, I'm trying to encourage partners not to think of the one thing you want to get out of this, but more like, what are the goals we all want to get towards? And then how is there alignment there? And again, that's about having honest communication and being able to say, you know what, I don't have bandwidth for this, but I would love to do that. Well, I'll solve the bandwidth problem for you. Just tell me what's really meaningful here, right? And I think a lot of people are still in a checkbox mentality about things, doing what they've been told to do and being able to cross that off. And that's clearly not how I think. And I don't know how to give advice to people who are coming up, because I would like to see more people who are honest communicators and are able to have clear conversations about goals as opposed to checkboxes.
Yep. Yeah. That's good. Wow. Can you share some of your maybe most interesting current or exciting current projects, so we just get a little flavor of what's going on in Ann Arbor or what's going on in automotive?
Let me think. Well, I think we all know that energy is right now the hot topic. There is both federal investment when it comes to energy infrastructure, sustainability, climate impact. It's a field that is having, I believe, a renaissance. There was clean tech, and then a lot of that clean tech died, and now we're seeing a renaissance of that, and it's playing in both public sector and the industry, with the industry taking obviously more of the focus of EVs. Let's build EVs, and those EVs will probably be the platforms for the AVs. So it is incremental growth in that sense, that it's going to go in that direction, but we need to build the infrastructure for it. But for a lot of cities, it also means really thinking of sustainability and what it means for a city. We're going to move towards net zero. What does that look like? So Ann Arbor has a A to zero plan, how to get to zero. And I was on one of the advisory committees for transportation for that as well. And that happened even before a lot of the energy announcements happened as a pre-pandemic effort. But I think a lot of cities are realizing, and I am glad that this is a stand that most people are taking, that EVs is not our answer to sustainability. EVs is important, great. It is not the answer to climate change. And so a lot of cities are investing in better walking, biking, e-scooters. And that's, I think, important as well. And so I think going back to, I think one of the things we started talking about, like, what does mobility look like? Like, it needs to be the system, but it's not one thing. It's not the EV is not going to solve our transportation problem. If the AV is not, autonomous vehicle is not going to solve our transportation problem. It's like a system. It's like when all the modes combine. It's like Captain Planet. It's like all modes combine. They're all seamless. They are digitally and physically connected. You can go from one place to the other. That's what it would look like. We're not there in Michigan. I can tell you that. But that's what I aspire to. And I try to even make the companies that I'm working with daily, it is the autonomous delivery robot company, or somebody's making the charging infrastructure for an e-scooter. How can they think of themselves not in isolation, not in silo, but as part of the system? Like, what does that mean for you to be part of the system? Because it can't be done by public sector alone. They can't build the system. It cannot be done by private sector alone. They can't build the system. So it needs to be this multi-collaboration. And that multi-collaboration means that we all have to be constantly improving our product, but thinking about how it connects to a system for maximum gain. And so in Ann Arbor, you asked, what are we doing? I mentioned to you, we have this pilot that we're running, A2Go. It's been running for now a few months. October 2021 is when it starts. So it's going to run for a full year. And so we're very excited with that. The ridership has been very good. We're collecting a lot of data, and we're also trying to impact perception around autonomous vehicles. How do people think about that? Do they feel scared to get in an autonomous vehicle? It's a lot to do with education, with research and development, along with providing people connectivity that they can get off any of our transit hubs and then use this as a way to get around. So I think that project is definitely what we're doing right now. Apart from that, like I said, I'm constantly always thinking of improving. So we have a lot of different programs for startups and innovators at Spark. But right now, what I'm doing is looking at other ecosystems around us and trying to compare them to us to see, what are they doing that's accelerating their growth that we should be doing. And sometimes it's a policy thing, which obviously I alone cannot change, but I can advocate for because I sit on some of these bodies. But sometimes it's simple programs. Sometimes it's just simple bridges. Those investors had a direct line of communication with somebody, so they invested more in that region. It's about knowing the right person. It's about building that network. So I'm trying to understand the why that Boston or Silicon Valley is doing well and how Ann Arbor can get there. We're comparatively, I think, a younger innovation ecosystem, but in terms of the density of number of startups to the population, we're very much comparable to some of these cities that we're looking at.
Interesting. It's exciting stuff.
It is.
Any other questions? Or is it time to get practical?
I think we're there.
I would too. I think so
Time to
too.
start getting practical.
2 pages going.
I know I've got I have just about the same. So our listener by now knows this. For Pete's sake, it's episode 25 already. That every single episode, can you believe it's episode 25 already? Wow. I know that every episode ends with what we call the Let's Get Practical, specific things that you, our listener, can begin to implement, hopefully today, tomorrow, in your organization to start making inroads in any one of the areas that we've talked about and discussed today. So, Komal, we'll give you the opportunity to go first as our guest. As a listener, what advice, what guidance would you have that he or she can start implementing tomorrow?
Okay, so I would definitely say, I think this has been the theme of the conversation, is build a strategic framework that inspires a culture of innovation. Tell them what you want to get to. Everyone in the organization needs to know that, not just your leadership team. Like everyone needs to know that. They need to feel empowered towards working towards that goal as an organization. And that, I think, is extremely empowering. The second, I would say, is system thinking. It's both within the organization that you do that you don't, again, that's, you're not thinking of your silo, you're thinking of how that contributes to the bigger organization. But even outside the organization, that's how you build partnerships, by thinking of the wider picture. How are you impacting the change? Well, you'll do that when you think of the system that you're part of. So in the case of mobility, that could be how people are getting around. How are you contributing to that within other people? And how can those partnerships make that a more seamless thing? And then one last, I will say, which is, I think, the inclusion bit, that, again, we touched on this, is like, just having different looking people is not good enough. Having those diverse voices feel like they're contributing, that they are really making a difference. That's what we're aspiring for.
That's great.
Beautiful. All right. Who wants to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
Well, we've talked, we were just talking about diversity, and we know that that is a big topic. But I love, Komal, what you said about how many, and this is the let's get practical, not ask about how many applicants were diverse, but ask about how did we go about getting our applicants?
Yeah.
How many diverse avenues did we explore to find the diversity that we're looking for?
Mm-hmm.
I just, that was beautiful. I loved it. I just liked, and in terms of let's get practical, is that is a leader's job to prepare their organization for change. Mm-hmm. And it's vital. And their role in preparation is incredibly important. So leaders out there, hear it. It has a lot to do with your leadership. I'll give one more. No one thing will solve our energy problems or our climate problems. And I think a lot of times when I hear the word innovation, I'm thinking of what's that one thing? What's that one thing that's going to disrupt, or what's that one thing that's going to create a whole lot of wealth, or what's that one thing that's going to clean all the water that goes into people's homes? But it's your ecosystem pieces are, making it clear it's not one thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Patsy, do you want to go, or you want me to go?
Sure. Yep, I'm ready.
Okay, go for it.
One that I thought was really important was be respectful of the status quo, of the traditional ways of thinking, and as a change agent, find other changes, other champions within that organization or within a group that are going to support the change that you're willing to make happen. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. Mm-hmm. Let's see. I love the one about taking feedback and accepting failure. That it's an opportunity to pivot, to adjust, to accept, and then find a new solution by asking questions. Mm-hmm. That's very process oriented. Let's see what else I have here. I've got, as a leader, any leader in your organization, but especially you, the CEO that are listening in, know your strengths. Know what you really enjoy and know what you don't enjoy or not good at. Because when you know those things, then you'll know who to add to your team and to fill in your gaps. And by doing that, you'll have a much stronger team. You are so good at asking why. So get to the why. We do one exercise that's 5 whys. Get to the why of the matter. Get to the heart of the matter. Mm-hmm. So why am I doing this? Why are we doing this? So that's part of the curiosity piece. And in doing that, it empowers everybody to contribute their voice. And let's also, that you said, be curious and look to what other cities, other organizations are doing. So often we look at that as a competition, but they have a different way of putting ideas together. So look to outside yourself for new policies, new systems thinking, so that you can learn from. Mm-hmm. So those would be mine.
I'll add to that, Pat, also that, I found people are very forthcoming. I've asked so many people that, I want to learn, how your city is doing this so well, or, as an investor, how did you think of this thing? And people love to talk about it. They're not feeling like, oh, you're going to, suddenly Ann Arbor is going to become bigger than Boston. I don't think anybody thinks of that. And so I can understand that in specific industries, the competition is very high and people find it very hard to ask those questions of competitors. But there are always people in the ecosystem who are outside that can give you that feedback on like, why is that one doing so well? And I think it's very helpful to hear that from other people. What are you seeing? Why are they doing it well? Why are they not doing it well? And sometimes I find it very helpful. I often ask Lem for this. It's like, what do you think I do well? Because as an external person, they can see things in you that sometimes you fail to see in yourself.
Yes.
It's a very good mirror. It's like, if it comes with, it can also give you feedback to work on some things, which is also very helpful. But sometimes it's also a good validation of, yes, this is how I'm viewed, and this is my, people see this as my strength. I should capitalize on that.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
My turn? Yeah, I am. Okay, so I want to add. You guys, you took all my answers. I feel like you cheated.
Know.
You cheated like you were looking at my paper during the test. But they were such great points. I want to add one thing, Patsy. When you've already touched on the as a leader, knowing your strengths and filling in the gaps in your team. And Komal, I wrote this down. It was along that same point. It's you said, be the most authentic version of yourself, even at the risk of making others uncomfortable. And I just thought that was insightful. Right? You have to be true to yourself, and then it's a strength, and acknowledging it, then you know where to fill in the gaps. Two that I thought were really powerful, and then I'll throw it back out to everybody else for one last anything we may have forgotten. Komal, I thought you when the conversation about paying attention to the disruptors, and you made a great point that really everybody in the organization needs to be paying attention. That everybody has to be thinking innovatively, paying attention to the disruptors, the disruptors, and then have an organization as the CEO. It's your job to create the kind of environment where people can elevate that, where they can bring that, they can raise those disruptors to you for consideration and potentially input into the strategic plan. Your job as the CEO then is to develop the skill of parsing through all those disruptors to weed through the noise and identify the ones that are really relevant to the organization. So it was such a great answer. It's not the CEO's job to pay attention. You've got to engage everybody in that conversation. And the last piece, Komal, when you were talking about looking at the opportunities that you've been given, those opportunities to speak and present, looking at it differently instead of seeing it as as tokenism, which it may very well be. What I took away from that is really to seize every opportunity to break down the barriers of color, gender, sex, to show others in the room how badass you really are and how badass you can be, to show others how much you and others who've potentially been excluded and marginalized, how much you really belong there. Don't pass up those opportunities, even if it's questionable how you got there. You belong there, and seize that opportunity. I thought that's great advice. And like I said, they took all my other answers, so that's I'm angry. No, it was great. Anything to add to the Let's Get Practical list? Anything that we've missed? Anybody wants to circle back around and make sure that we cover?
I want to cover something that I think, Komal, you exemplified, didn't mention, is that you build really authentic, trusting relationships where you sincerely listen to people, you can connect with them, and I think that is foundational for the work that you're doing, and any of you leaders listening in need to do. So yeah. I want to acknowledge you for that.
I really appreciate that. So you're saying that. I do try. I will say the hardest thing I have ever done is telling someone that their idea is not going to work or their company should close. It's not going to work. It is very hard to do that without killing their faith or making them feel demotivated, because it's obviously people invest a lot when you start a company.
Yep.
It's time, it's effort. And we have a lot of, as an organization, we have lots of tools to make sure that that is a swift process, that you don't invest so much time, do these things early so that you're best prepared, that you don't invest in bad ideas. But still, sometimes it is a good idea. Sometimes it is a good team, but the world is not ready for it, or things happen. And that is very hard, having that conversation. I've had to do it a few times, and it has been very difficult. And the only way I've been able to get past that, and this is good advice that I received from the person I currently report to, is that they don't need to love you. They need to respect you. They need to see that you tried your best to make sure that they can move forward, that they can deal with this, that you were there for them, even though this was very hard, but you did all you could do.
That's good.
And I think that has been the only way I've been able to sleep when I've had to do that, because it's very hard, because I've also invested a lot in it, and I personally know these people. And I've invested in them as much as their company. And I think for any CEO that has to kill an idea or has to let go of somebody, I think it's a very similar pain. It's a very similar feeling of, could I have done more? This is very hard for the other person. It's their livelihood, it's their job. And then having the ability to say, my role here is to do the most I can to help them move from this, for them to be able to see the light at the end of this tunnel. So that, yes, they might not say I'm their best friend, or even say, they'd like to go to lunch with me. That's not the goal, but like they feel supported.
That's terrific. Yeah.
It really is.
Komal, if someone would like to get in touch with you, or if they want to learn more about Ann Arbor Spark, where would you have us direct them?
Yeah, so you can definitely email me at komal@annarborusa.org. My telephone number, you can call me, text me, 734-834-4034. You can find me on LinkedIn. I respond very fast. I am always looking to meet new people. And so I hope to hear from more of you.
Excellent. All right, Leb, Leb or Patsy, any final thoughts before we sign off?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you. It's been fun. It's been authentic. It's been real. It's been badass. It's been good points. It's been, let's get practical, and it's important. I'd close with this. The other thing that I was going to add to let's get practical is, if you're an authentic leader, have your people's back. That story that you shared. And in a sense, I think, Komal, when you are letting people know you don't see how this is going to work out, you're actually being authentic and you have their back. It still hurts, but I'd rather know early if there's something I'm doing that just isn't going to work out, including maybe, I thought I was going to fit into this culture and I don't. Or, this job was made for me, but actually it's not. It's like, I consider that person a friend, even though it's very difficult. So thank you for that. I know how authentic you are.
You guys are amazing. Thank you for having me. I think I had a blast. It was so much fun talking to you guys.
Oh, good.
Good. See, it's not nearly as painful and scary as people think. So
Not at all.
Thank you, Patsy. Any final thoughts?
No,
Take it away, Patrick. Where are they going to get the Let's Get Practicals, all that?
Yeah. So thank you to our listener for sticking around for another episode. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Komal, thank you for joining us. Thank you for bringing your wisdom and your insights, your perspective. I already know it's going to be a great episode, so thank you. Listener, you can find this episode's Let's Get Practical, as well as all of our previous episodes, Let's Get Practicals, on our website at thefrustratedceo.com. And please leave us a review. Let us know what you think of the show, any suggestions or ideas for future episodes. And if you're interested in being a guest on The Frustrated CEO, then please, you can reach out to any one of us at leb@thefrustratedceo.com, patsy@thefrustratedceo.com, or patrick@thefrustratedceo.com. We'd love to engage you in that process and see if maybe we can frame an episode for the future. That's it. Signing off. Thank you. And we will see you next time on The Frustrated CEO.